This podcast media series focuses specifically on sustainability in Alentejo, a wine-producing area covering nearly all of southern Portugal. The project includes interviews with a number of winemakers, including Iain Richardson from Mouchão, the team at Herdade dos Grous, Patrão from Coelheiros, and João Roquette from Esporão. I also speak with Helena Ferreira, Director of Production at the Adega de Borba, where 1,000 families are dependent on the sustainability of the cooperative, as well as the American climate scientist and wine producer, Dr. Gregory V. Jones. And of course, I speak at length to João Barroso, who has been a key force in developing the Wines of Alentejo Sustainability Programme, or Wasp, and who has been my guide on the road trip across the region in September 2021. The aim of this work is to identify the characteristics of the challenges winemakers and estate owners are facing and their responses to those challenges. Additionally, I'm looking at the role Wasp has played in transforming the response to the climate emergency and really paving the road to a more resilient future. Dr. Gregory V. Jones drew attention to Alentejo in his study dating back to 2005, and it's striking how wine producers have internalized what this research means in terms of risk and how they are responding to it. This is where Wasp has emerged, learning from other regions, but also taking time to develop a thorough and robust framework for producers to operate, whilst transforming to a range of practices, including organic and regenerative, that together constitute a true pathway to creating a fully sustainable region. This introductory episode begins with producers talking about how they experience and perceive the threats, starting with Dr. Greg Jones recapping on the vulnerability of Alentejo to a heating climate.
The region of Alentejo is in the southern part of Portugal. It's just far enough inland that it has less of a coastal influence. So it's a fairly summer dry, winter wet, but again, not quite so wet as it is in the north of Portugal or in Galicia.
Yeah, so Alentejo is, in my opinion, and I think all the studies are showing this, it's going to be one of the most affected areas in terms of viticulture in the world.
I think we have wines that the natural profile of each grape, of course, with the signature of the winemaker, Luís Duarte, very well balanced with concentration and freshness, because this is the thing that we are always looking for, especially in a region where we are, which is very hot and dry. You didn't have the chance maybe to feel the hotness in the summertime here, but it's terrible. And it's very challenging for us to produce wines like that. And I think we are going on this way.
Heat events during the middle of the summer, of course, problematic. Not having enough water, or during drought periods where water becomes even more scarce, being able to hydrate the vines in any way, shape, or form is definitely a challenge.
In the Alentejo, I mean, you are known as a sort of a climate vulnerable region.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with your comments. I mean, we're definitely in the vulnerable spots. I think the last 5 years, except for this year, we could see that very well. We have data that shows that without any doubt.
Yesterday, I went to the fields and we see that in the fields, the fields are very dry. And now it's a rain season, so it should be more water in the fields. So one of the most important things that we have noticed with this climate change is water
scarcity.
Yes.
I think a lot of it is fear. You know, if you're a farmer and you're seeing your crop, just all the leaves falling off your vines, for example, you always wonder, I mean, you can't let it happen. I mean, you just can't. I mean, you just spent the whole agricultural year and many seasons, let's say, just looking after your vineyards as though they're a son or a daughter.
With so much at stake in Alentejo from the accelerating rate of climate heating, it has been amazing to see the transition towards sustainable winemaking, with a heavy emphasis on regenerative farming. Regenerative farming focuses on healthy soils, which when teeming with life ensure a healthy ecosystem. Not all of the estates I saw were fully focused on viticulture. Some are growing olive trees and cork oak trees, among other crops, while letting sheep roam and leaving large areas of land to flourish uninterrupted. One instance that impressed me was on the estate of Casa Clara, around 20 kilometers from the border with Spain, where vines run down a steep slope to the edge of the reservoir. Rain patterns are becoming more erratic with long hot and dry periods, followed by heavy downpours. The day before we arrived, there had been 18 millimeters of rain in a single downpour, placing a carpet-like cover of grasses and other cover crops between the rows of vines, mean that the inflow of water is transported via the root systems and drained more easily by the soils. There is no visible erosion and minimal runoff, so that the water is stored as a supply to the vines during the drier periods to come. Maria Clara also showed us their development of new terraces under construction. The terraces are being orientated to face the north in anticipation of the heating climate. There are terraces across Europe that predate the Romans, and yet here we are today seeing a contemporary shaping of the environment to meet the climatic needs of a fast approaching future that will last long beyond our own lifetimes. That multi-generational outlook is one the world of wine has long understood. As a nod to the past, Maria Clara is making a wine in Talia, Portuguese amphora that have been used in Alentejo for millennia. I enjoy the Ermo wine made from Arinto grapes with guests when I return back home. The fresh edge of the Talia contrasts with the rich flavors from the skin contact and lees aging, garnering much approval and pleasure from our table of tasters. The Sonoma-born author and climate scientist, Professor Kimberly Nicholas, has carried out extensive research into wine and climate change. When I asked Kimberly about regenerative farming, she immediately put the benefits into the broader context of responding to the climate emergency.
A lot of focus on regenerative agriculture is on rebuilding soil and rebuilding and maintaining soil health, including organic matter and carbon in the soil, which also fights climate change. Soil globally contains about twice as much carbon as the atmosphere. The more carbon we can keep in the soil or help the soil take out of the atmosphere is directly fighting climate change. So I think there's a lot of promise there. I mean, basically to stop climate change, humanity has to do two things. We have to stop burning fossil fuels, leave them in the ground. So no more coal, oil, and gas. And we have to make a change with our food and land system so that we're actually working with rather than against nature. And that is where regenerative ag comes in.
One estate where the integrated regenerative approach was really evident was at Herdade dos Coelheiros, just north of Évora, the main historic city of Alentejo.
In 2016, we stopped hunting because the state was very famous for hunting. And when we stopped hunting, birds like eagles and falcons, they start to come back again because they had the rabbits, they had animals that they could catch. And when those big birds came, the small birds that we called estorninhos, which was a big problem for us and why we use the nets, these estorninhos, they start to run away from the state because they were afraid of the eagles and the falcons that we had here.
The thriving biodiversity that I witnessed at Coelheiros was a testament to how regenerative integrated farming can invigorate the landscape. But they are not alone. João Barroso, manager of the Wasp programme, gave this first-hand account of what he saw at another estate in a climate-vulnerable part of the Alentejo.
Obviously, the scenarios and the projections are not very hopeful, but what I see, and even yesterday this happened, I went to a producer and they're in Vidigueira, which is a fairly hot region in a fairly dry part of Alentejo. When I had last been there, maybe 4 years ago, it was a desert, really. It was bare land, bare soil, some vineyards there, of course, but, fairly dry and fairly bare. And yesterday was a bloody Garden of Eden, They had planted lots of ecological corridors, they had lots of functional biodiversity, they had cover crops everywhere, they had pastures, everything green. These guys have been doing a massive investment in terms of regeneration and adaptive agroecology, in terms of creating the conditions for a more adapted strategy towards, on one hand, climate change, is obviously on the other, the survival of their investments. And this example really made me very hopeful because, as I said, it was a desert. It was a literal desert 4 years ago.
This transformation is happening across the region. Here is Iain Richardson from Mouchão, who himself completed a master's in climate change in order to better understand the challenges his family's historic estate is facing.
When I first arrived here back in 2014, early 2015, the mortality rate was enormous. We had roughly 600 to 800 trees every year, which would die. And these are lovely old oaks. And it was absolutely tragic for us. And, I'd sit here on a Saturday afternoon watching these huge trucks of wood struggling to climb the hill here. And it was pretty heartbreaking. So what we've done since then is we've planted 30,000 trees in the last 3 years, cork trees. Obviously, we're not expecting them all to take. We've got all sorts of other issues here as well, which you could argue are climate related because it impacts the fauna. So we've got a predominance now of things like wild boar, which do a lot of damage and chew our new trees. Anyway, it's an issue for us. It's a real issue with the cork. We're going to plant another 15,000 cork trees in the next 2 years. And so we're sort of reaching where we want to be. But now we've got to manage the property in a way that's sustainable looking forward.
Indigenous and better adapted grape varieties are being rediscovered in Alentejo, where producers are investigating what works best from both a climate and taste quality perspective. At Esporão, rows of testing vines are being monitored in order to identify characteristics that are better adapted to less water, more heat, and slower ripening. A variety that travelled from France and was first planted at Mouchão, but is now more Portuguese than French, is Alentejo Boucher. This red variety is widely acknowledged to have found its true home in Alentejo. In this next clip, Professor Kimberly Nicholas shares some insight into why indigenous varieties are trendy for a good reason. They actually boost climate resilience.
We have a paper a couple of years ago that showed that over 80% of the global wine market is made up of just 12 varieties. So those are the most common that you see on the supermarket shelf or on the wine list at a restaurant: Cabernet Sauvignon, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay. Nothing against those. I enjoy drinking them myself, but there are literally thousands of other varieties out there. People have been cultivating wine grapes for thousands of years and developing and taking advantage of the natural diversity and exacerbating it and developing it towards varieties that are suited for all kinds of conditions. And what we're doing by having this kind of monocultural system, this very narrow system of wine growing where we only take a handful of grapes, is we're really limiting our options for adaptation, because there are varieties out there that, for example, are much better adapted to warmer temperatures, that are more efficient at using water, which is a scarce and limiting resource in many wine growing regions, potentially more so with ongoing climate change. So there are real options for adaptation and switching varieties. And that's something that we advocated for in this study, because it's much more sustainable to keep vineyards where they are now and make adaptations in the vineyard, potentially including turning over or changing varieties, rather than actually moving the vineyards northward to, for example, or uphill to higher elevation. And that's because the planet is already pretty full. There are people all over the place. We're already using most of the land on Earth in one way or another. We need to leave some of the natural land for nature. And, we can't be moving our agriculture around and destroying basically more habitat of what limited habitat remains. So we suggest that it's a real underappreciated option. And from our study, we found that about half, back to this idea that it's possible to adapt, but there are also limits to adaptation. About you can basically double your adaptive capacity by using a broader range of varieties and turning over varieties. That doesn't mean that there will be no impacts on the wine industry. There still are places that will really struggle and might not make it under a lot of warming, but it gives a real lifeline for a lot of regions.
What we've been doing basically is, from one side, we've been looking and testing other grape varieties. We have an amplographic field in which we have 188 grape varieties. So we're studying if some of them would respond better to climate change than the ones that we use. And we know that Alentejo was a dry farming region until the mid-90s, where irrigation really arrived and was possible to do in Alentejo. And productions before that are quite good. So the incredible change that happened in Alentejo in the 90s with water now it's something that we should worry about, because the grape varieties that are not as well adapted to heat as the other ones were.
And all these little changes that we are doing, recovering the ecosystem, adapting the varieties that we have in the state. So the state was famous for international varieties like Cabernet, Merlot, Chardonnay, which are great varieties, but probably not very well adapted to our climate and for the future climate that we're going to have. I think those Alicante Boucher, Anton Vaz are very well adapted to this kind of climate. And they don't suffer so much as with the heat waves that are very common now in Alentejo, because the berry is a little bit more, has more volume, so the heat waves don't hit so much the grapes.
So I think it's better to start with the market point of view. So maybe in the beginning of the project of Herdade dos Grous, the consumers were very focused on a very international or well-known grape varieties, worldwide known grape varieties. And of course, we follow this. And I would say that the profile of our wines was extremely close to wines, for example, from Australia or from California, or and so. But then we start to realize that the grapes themselves in our field, they don't have the same behavior and the same profile that they have, that the traditional ones have here. So we start to figure out that maybe it's better to keep on high the traditional ones or the indigenous ones and see what they can give us. And we figure out that actually this profile, the traditional ones, grapes profile, are much better. And it was actually what then we start looking for, because also the market start looking for this. I think it's more or less a relationship between market, producer, and grapes or field or vineyards.
The journey towards sustainability is daunting, and the wine producers I spoke to were all at various stages along the route. What is fascinating to me is the role that the Wines of Alentejo Sustainability Programme has played in opening up the region to become a hive of knowledge exchange. A lot of credit goes to João Barroso for his leadership and ability to inspire people to share their discoveries and expand the pool of knowledge. Part of the future climate resilient landscape is about community, and in this case, rethinking how we work so that competitors are also our collaborators. This concept is vital, and I heard it here again and again.
Sharing knowledge across the wine sector is really important. You know, if I figure out something I can do here in my vineyard, then why not share it with people in Alentejo? I mean, we all need to be better stewards, and if somebody can figure out how to do any one little component of our farming practices, our management practices, then we need to share that information as best we can.
Keeping the knowledge is power is gone. Sharing the knowledge is power. That's the new paradigm. And so when I go into this project, this sharing the knowledge is power was one of my key drives, because we had indeed companies with a lot of knowledge, and we had indeed companies with lack of knowledge and with hunger for knowledge. And so what we managed to do, and this was something quite satisfactory also, was to create this knowledge sharing network.
Alentejo is a very, very big wine region, and it looks like everybody is doing things very a part of each other. But with this program, I think we start to get more close to each other. I'm talking about different producers. And I think the most interesting aspects of the program was we could be in touch and see what the others were doing. And we could more or less copy and paste here to our project and see what this could be for us. For me, this is the most interesting thing about the program.
Wines of Alentejo and the Sustainable Program, they were a key player for us. They helped us so much, because they gave us indicators, KPIs for us in terms of sustainability, how much water are we using, about the way that we manage energy. Are we doing the best practice or not? In terms of viticulture, usually they do workshops where all the growers, they can share their experience in terms of sustainability, what they are doing, what are the challenges that they are facing. So I think Vinhos do Alentejo, the sustainable program, is very important because it's an excellent platform to share ideas and to help us to advance in terms of sustainability.
One of the most important things about the program and about the organization of the program were to put us talk to each other, the different producers.
I think they've done an absolutely wonderful job. They're leaders in Portugal when it comes to, in terms of wine regions, they're leaders in terms of sustainability. And they're keeping us all, thinking all the time about what we're doing.
The Wasp programme is a clear sign of leadership in sustainability that is growing in momentum and enhancing the reputation of Alentejo as a contemporary wine producing area. Regional and national programs are emerging around the world, and maintaining the clarity of the messages we project is critical. The whole story fits into a larger jigsaw that makes up the global environment in which we are all stakeholders. Somehow we are all on the same journey to learn how to live within planetary boundaries without diminishing our horizons of ambition and aspiration. Every one of these stories of traditions of building resilience and preparing for the future also become our own story.
I think we are the only region in Portugal that has an authority around sustainability. And I think that's for two reasons. I think that's because there is the program, the sustainability program, which is something that was formalized and there was a lot of work being done and was recognized. And I think that the fact that Esporão, it's now one of the 5 top organic wine producers in the world, I mean, also has something to say about the region's sustainability. So when we started in Esporão with sustainability, and even when the sustainability plan in Alentejo started, it was not a given that sustainability would have the importance that we're showing it has today. So everybody's jumping on board. And I think we have to take advantage of that and saying, put the flag and say we were pioneers and we did this first and we're going to help, and lead this movement in Portugal.
I think the best thing we can do is develop regional schemes that really work for those regions, but tie them into a broader understanding and framework at the global level.
Alentejo needs to also obviously affirm itself as the region that it is. We're the biggest region in the country. We are so far the sustainable region of the country. And so obviously if the country is lagging in terms of initiative, that's not our problem. We will carry on doing what we do best and obviously uphold and raise high the flag of Alentejo. If then the country will come and join us, they're more than welcome. But again, California is not the US, Champagne is not France. And so obviously there needs to be an alignment, a crossing, but at the same time, a parallel road that should be taken by both national and regional initiatives in this regard.
I think all the growers in Alentejo are very aware about the future and about what we're going to have in terms of climate change. So I think the numbers that we have today in terms of associated on the sustainability program, I think it shows very well that everyone is very concerned about it. So sustainability is the only way to keep doing wines in Alentejo. So this is the only way for us to survive and to keep going with the business. It's the only way. If we don't adapt, if we don't take measures, we are out of business.
So I think it's really important that people do understand it's not too late. There is still time for us to make a big difference to make this transition happen. And we're the only ones who can do it because no one has done it until now. And we're really the last chance that the climate and the planet and a lot of human civilization and some of the most beautiful wines have. So I think it is really important that people understand just how critical we are. And if you happen to be alive and hearing this podcast, then you happen to have been born at really the most critical time in human history, and you have a critical role to play.
Thanks for listening to this introductory episode of Sustainability in Alentejo, produced by me, Nick Breeze. In the next episode, I speak with climate and viticulture researcher Dr. Gregory V. Jones more comprehensively about the impacts of a warmer planet on viticulture.